This is about keeping global temperature rises above the pre-industrial age, before the Industrial Revolution, to a level that doesn't cause massive extreme weather, parts of the earth being left uninhabitable, ecosystems being destabilised, droughts, famines, you name it. And the gap between, for example, 1.5 and, say, 2.4, which lots of experts now think we're closer towards, is millions of lives. So to say disappointed, I think, belittles the tragedy of what's just unfolded. Whether it be, as you've noted, that there's no commitment to phase out coal use, instead to phase down, whatever that means. There's no mention of, by the way, oil and gas in the document, which is unfortunate to say the least. Also, rich countries, and we should bear in mind, because India has rightly got a lot of flack for coal, but rich countries are overwhelmingly responsible for the vast majority of emissions, and it's poorer countries who are going to suffer the worst brunt. So what poorer countries wanted was more of a financial contribution to help mitigate the impact in those poor countries, and that fell a lot short. And I know how this film ends. This film ends with millions of people in poorer countries being forced to flee their homes, and then rich countries going, we're not having these people. And actually, we could have done more to prevent that calamity unfolding.
I don't know whether this is, it's interesting, isn't it, whether we go with the Boris Johnson thing, which is, oh, we've done pretty well, or Alok Sharma, who is essentially in tears over it.
I think it's very difficult to turn around to the developing countries who want to use fossil fuels and say, I'm sorry, you can't do what we've done for 100 years. So the fact that we couldn't even get India and China round the table tells us their position.
You just said about it doesn't matter people's everyday lives. It does matter to the homes who've been repeatedly flooded in increasing numbers in this country, which is being made more likely by the climate emergency. And actually, it does matter in ways you're not really fleshing out. For example, having good, cheap, affordable, comfortable, high-quality public transport benefits all of us. That discourages people from using cars, and it makes our living standards better. That helps take on the climate emergency. It matters to people to have clean air for them and their kids. That helps take on the climate emergency. It matters for people in ex-industrial areas where all the industrial jobs got ripped out of communities to have new industries, renewable energy industries. It matters to them. So I don't agree with you. It will change all of our lives for the better and take on the climate emergency.
I think it makes no sense to be concentrating on fuels that we can't renew. So anything that has a finite amount in terms of coal and gas, it's obvious we should be moving away from that. That's just common sense.
And not to be dependent on Russia, for example.
You don't need to, exactly. But I also think we need better insulated houses.
Was it a failure?
I don't think the majority of people feel that it's particularly perfect.
It doesn't matter. Why do it? It's not a
poll.
Poll. It's about what does it.
I think it was.
Is it right or wrong?
I think it showcased a huge amount of hypocrisy with a lot of leaders arriving on their private jets.
Idea, yes, well, that's true. But the idea that we have the Industrial Revolution, we get rich, and then we tell India you can't have it. That seems to be the sticking point, and that is a moral issue, isn't it? Because you're right that the West is overwhelmingly responsible for these emissions, which is why the West should have made more financial contribution to those poorer countries for the reason you just said. But at the end of the day, we have reached the point we have in terms of temperature rises, and that's going to screw over disproportionately poorer countries. So if we keep blowing emissions into the atmosphere, they're going to suffer the most, which is why we need to invest in renewable energy. China, by the way, whatever its failures, is doing quite a lot to actually invest in and build up green energy and renewable energy. So actually, poorer countries are. I mean, they're doing both things. They're doing a lot of green and a a lot of coal, and it's difficult to work out which way they're going to end up. But
and at the end of the day, they're going to suffer the worst consequences. So we do need to throw everything we've got at that. But you're right, the West has benefited partly from the emissions that's put in the atmosphere that hit the global South, often countries they colonised and stole their resources from. That's a very valid point. That's why they need to do more to cover those costs.